Welcome back, everyone, to the Stateless Atheist. Today, the three heathens continue our conversation with Dr. Frank Turek on capturing Christianity. Here, we delve into apologetics. There's a little bit of evolution involved and a few metaphysical concepts. Along the way, we continue with our humor and throw a little libertarianism and anarchy in there as well. Please enjoy the show. If you have any other videos or comments that you'd like for us to respond to, or that you feel would be beneficial to the show, please comment below. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Let's begin.
I could do without this.
Yeah, right?
You want to dance to this?
It's like, if I want to see New York, I'll go to New York.
On apologetics.
Hey, you don't want to do that.
One from our patrons. What is the number one roadblock among college students that keeps them from accepting the gospel? Sex.
What the?
Next question.
I want to have sex, therefore I don't believe in God.
Oh man.
This guy's he's a joke. Like, oh no, Jason Brennan was saying that about William Lane Craig. But out of the two of them, he was saying William Lane Craig is a joke of a philosopher. The two of them, William Lane Craig is much better than Frank Turek.
William Lane Craig's actually a very intelligent man, even though I strongly disagree with a lot of his arguments. I mean, if you watch the debate he had on capturing Christianity with Dr. Alex Malpass, that was, I mean, he kind of surprised me because he broke from his usual, cookie cutter arguments, and he actually had a really nice back and forth with Dr. Malpass. So. No, I don't find the same thing with Turek. Turek's all about like these quick, one-liners and trying to get you, he's
Very
almost like
bullish.
yeah.
Very bullish.
It's like if Ben Shapiro tried to be a Christian apologist almost.
That's pretty fucking accurate.
So.
That's pretty good.
Along the same lines, he's almost like, say, a Kent Hovind with a little more intelligence, just a slight bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Be true. Okay. Look, I mean, you're the people out there who are watching. I ask people on college campuses all the time, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? An atheist will stand at the microphone and say no. And when I talk to them privately, they'll admit they don't want to live up to sexual.
I doubt anyone's ever said that. What he's probably talking to someone who's been homosexual or trans, and they've argued maybe that. Well, I'm not attracted to someone of the opposite sex. Therefore, why would I worship a God that says I should be put to death? That's probably what he's heard. And he's probably no, they just want to fuck everybody.
Yeah, because there are two things here. There's belief, right? And then there's acceptance, right? So you could show me that the kind of conservative Christianity that he believes in, undoubtedly, is true. And would I then fall to my knees and go, oh yeah, I'm worshiping? No, I wouldn't, but I would accept that it was true, if it was demonstrated, but I wouldn't suddenly become like this, worshiper, because I'm not convinced that it's a good thing. So.
Yeah, like Matt Dillahunty always says, I'll no longer be an atheist. That doesn't mean I'll be a Christian.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Christian ethic, or the Christian sexual ethic. The elephant in the room in the college campus is not, same thing is true on YouTube. Elephant in the room is not evidence, it's sex. People want to live the way they want.
It's evidence.
Want to live.
Well, yeah, it's probably that. Oh, hold on for a second. It's probably that, and also the fact that, really with the way things are going, and evidently individuals, of course, in schools today, they're becoming a lot more progressive. Yet the Bible doesn't really reflect our ideals of today, or the ones that individuals wish to be done tomorrow. Like, it doesn't do that very well at all. Yeah. So I think there's that as well. And I honestly think that the sexual aspects of it are are not that imperative. I don't think they're as widely known as the bigotry in the Bible. I really don't think that's the case. I mean, some people may gawk at sex before marriage, but I don't think that's going to have the same sort of level of concern as if it's saying that we need to stone gays and that they're abominations and et cetera, or men that lay with men, I suppose you could say, would be a bit more correct. But still, either way, to me, I think that stands out a lot more, and rather than anything sexual. And I don't know if Frank thinks that kids today are just sex crazed fucking maniacs, but believe it or not, I believe millennials are having less sex than previous generations. So I mean, again, I don't know. I don't think he's like pitting it on one specific age group. But
what about Japan? From what I hear, Japan is actually quite asexual these days. How come they're not all Christian?
Yeah, pretty religion itself, actually, to be frank with you, it's pretty quite the rarity.
I see what you did there.
What did I do there?
To be frank with it.
I didn't even realize that. That's a fake laugh because that's not a good joke.
But you know, I'm sure. I think he's wrong to frame it as sex. But I would say, you know, the more progressive people become, the more likely that when they're looking through, say, the Bible and hearing the teachings of the various churches and that kind of thing, they're going to be pretty against it. You know, they're going to be, you know, now that doesn't speak to the truth of whether or not the being exists that is behind all of it. But in terms of whether or not they're going to want to accept it, if the being were the case, you know, it did exist, they're probably not going to want to, because they're going to be like, yeah, screw that. I'm not, you know, it's not like they're going to go from being very strongly in defense of, you know, women's rights and gay rights and all that kind of stuff and go, oh, well, it exists, so I guess I'm going to have to now throw everything out that I've believed in and defended, you know, most of my life.
Have either of you seen God is Grey?
No.
Well, she's a YouTube channel, and Mr. Atheist recommends her all the time. And I've watched a few of her videos.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's a theist. She is 1,000 times better than all these other ones. She's getting into arguments with Girl Defined and Paul and Morgan about how she thinks, well, we need to accept gays. We need to throw out purity culture and stuff like that. And those channels, Girl Defined, Paul and Morgan, and all them, they go off and they attack her because she's more progressive. No. This is not what God wants. And, well, Girl Defined is like, first off, none of us truly know what God wants. Everything we get is what we feel, and I feel a loving God, per se, would not be against love between two individuals. And things like that. Like,
especially if they were responsible for it, unless if you want to throw out that being gay is all a part of your free will.
Yeah, I mean, if religion is going to continue, it needs to go through another reformation, I think.
Well, something I wanted to bring up with Frank, not to discredit him. I'm not trying to say this discredits him, but it's more of a point of fruitation. And I wonder if Frank is coming from a sexual perspective, because maybe sex rights was a lot more prevalent back in his time, and I really don't think it's that prevalent anymore. I'm not saying it's not prevalent at all. I'm just saying I don't think it's as prevalent when you think about some of the more important aspects. Now, obviously, some individuals may talk about sexual orientation and sex. I don't think those are completely the same things, because just because you have a sexual orientation, that doesn't mean that you want to fuck the person that you want to be involved with. So for most people, that may be the case, but that still doesn't imply it. So with that being said, I don't think that as far as when you think about things like contraception or anything like that, which obviously that was quite a while ago that it was legalized, but I still think that there was a lot of conversations around it, and there still is to some certain degree today of whether if it is ethical and whatnot. But I just when I think about some of the more prevalent conversations, that just, especially with God, that doesn't come to mind with me. I think a lot of them is first and foremost homosexuality, and I think every once in a while you're going to see the slavery thing come up. So, and evidence, obviously, evidence is the big one. That's obviously no doubt it. But if I were to speak away from evidence, I think those are some of the more common ones.
Everyone else, how they have to behave sexually. despite the fact that they still believe in certain sexual rules, right? You don't have sex with children, you know, it has to be consent, you know, so they still impose rules on it. But
So how do you address that? How do you go?
Saying there are rules to sex where you can't harm another human being, I don't know how you get God out of that. Like, oh, so we don't believe you should have sex with children, therefore it's contradictory to think gays having sex is okay? Like, I don't know how the two compare.
Well, this is something that is an issue for me, and it's like, look, if you can give me a justification for why something is bad, then we can actually have a conversation about it. And so when he's talking about, oh well, you know, you guys, you believe in rules for sex and blah blah blah, it's like, well, sure, and those rules are based on harm caused to other people, whereas the kind of rules he's talking about, he would fully admit there doesn't need to be some kind of justification. It just matters that God says it's wrong. And so therefore, that's why you have to follow it. And the thing that it gets it for younger people especially is it's like, wait a second. No, you don't just get to say no and that's it. Like, there's got to be a good reason for why we should have some kind of a rule. And a lot of the kind of so-called Christian sexual ethics, they don't really give any kind of a good justification for it. It's just kind of, well, hey, you know, God says so, and so that's what it is. Or at least, you know, I grew up, you know, Catholic, and so the kind of view you would get as well, you know, sex is only for, you know, procreation essentially, right? That's what they would say, and that needs to be held within marriage. And so single people shouldn't even be, you know, just going out and having sex and stuff technically. And they're like, oh, we treat homosexuals and straight people the same, you know, because we're saying none of them should be having sex. You have to have it within marriage with the goal of procreation. Now there's the big hole in that argument of, well, what about the people who are infertile and they can't have children? They get to just enjoy themselves while everybody else is held to these same standards? And they pretty much say yes.
Fuck
because
yes, please.
And why would God make people infertile?
Well, the thing that I wanted to bring up, and that's, of course, a great explanation, Ryan. The explanation, and you mentioned harm and what have you. And I think the point that, of course, and I'm sure both of you have heard this time and time again, and we will probably continue to hear it, but the one thing that individuals mention is the increased chance of HIV transmission, AIDS, and what have you. And obviously, that's not inherent to homosexuals. That's inherent to men and men. And depending on the research you find, and I've really seen it varied, but typically what I find is that lesbians really don't have an increased risk of HIV transmission, and it's very comparable to heterosexuals. But I just want to throw that out there. Even if that is the case, that's not a good reason to say that it's unethical at all. Yeah. Because merely because there's harm, that doesn't necessarily imply that something is unethical, or at least so much so that what we're doing to try and counteract it is moral in itself. And we have to wonder those things, that first and foremost, even if we do come forth and we and I'm not saying this, but even if we were to say, oh, HIV's increased risk, that's so problematic. And even if we were to assume that lesbians had about the same rate as male on male sex, it still really wouldn't do very much until we ask ourselves, what can we do to try and handle this situation? If you put yourselves in a situation where you just want to demonize these individuals, to me, that's going to create a lot more harm, because there are certainly ways to prevent the transmission of HIVs, and they may not be the most enjoyable, but I mean, if your answer is just to belittle everyone, I mean, well, that's very problematic, because already at that point, it's like,
I usually try
how
to
do we prevent that, you know?
I usually try to say the things that we're against are things that lack consent, because if you look at rape, it lacks that's what turns sex into rape. It lacks consent. Doesn't matter if you physically harm the person, it lacks consent.
I think it's very imperative. I think it's definitely very imperative, but I don't think it's the one guiding principle, because I think there can definitely be times, let's say for instance, where a slave may still approve of slavery.
Well,
they may be highly indoctrinated too.
Yes,
by the way.
but
so
that
people
goes
would
back
kind of
to what I argue with the distinction between a stateless society and an anarchist society. Indoctrination, to me, is a form of, I don't know if I'd call it coercion, but something similar. Where, because if someone convinces you that you must listen to them, that's one reason why I argue against religions.
because they indoctrinate people to do something based upon, oh, this is what you were told. And if I was told my whole life that I must stay within this room or I'll burn to death or whatever when I walk out of the room, and then when I become 19, 20-year-old and I still choose never to leave this room, I never really consented to that. That's some type of, like you were saying, indoctrination. I don't know of a better word for it. Or I forget who says it. Is it Roderick Long or whatever, you voluntary, a more robust conception of consent. Consent isn't just something that you chose. It's something that you were able to freely choose. If I was indoctrinated something so ingrained, I can't freely choose the opposite. How could you really call it consent? So that's why I still think consent is the necessary justification, but you have to take that consent to be a larger principle than just lack of coercion. It has to be lack of indoctrination too.
Sure. I agree. Of course.
Because
But,
like, you could also say a wife could be indoctrinated that she must have sex with her husband. And actually, Christianity does that. Look at the transformed wife. She says quite often, Christian wives, they have to have sex with their husbands whenever the husband wants. And there are some women that do.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not consent. Ryan, do you think that's consent?
Say it again. My connection's not great right now.
Wow. If someone's say a Christian wife, she's indoctrinated that she must have sex with her husband whenever he wants.
No, I wouldn't say it's consent. No, I mean, I'd be curious what he would say if we had a conversation. I said, well, look, the Christian metric, or at least the one he puts forth for determining whether something is right or wrong, at least on the issue he's talking about, which is sexual issues. If I disagree with that, how are we supposed to move forward here with you convincing me that I should take on Christianity? Well, you're going to have to somehow convince me that way of thinking is the way to go. And I have to say, I'm not a very sex obsessed person myself. So he's going to have some hard work ahead of him, because for me, I want to hear a good justification for why something is either right or wrong.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's like, well, I'm going to look at those things like consent and harm, and those two things tend to overlap a lot. And that's at least a good starting place. Now, I agree with Alex that something being harmful in and of itself doesn't mean that, someone is being, like unethical or something like that. There's a spectrum of how much harm we'll tolerate. Like if you pinch someone on the arm, right, like that's a pretty low level of harm to a person. But so there is definitely more of a spectrum there. But the thing is we have an actual reasonable metric that we can go off of and we can have a conversation about, versus, well, my God says that you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, and we go, well, why? And it's like, well, because he says so. There's really not much of a defense of it. So that's my problem with it. It's not because, oh boy, I just want to have sex like crazy. That's just not who I am. But my issue with it is more, there's just no justification for why anything's being said. It's just this kind of authoritarian appeal of, well, God said so you got to put up with it. He's the all-knowing, all-powerful God,
He's the creator of everything, therefore he has the right to make all the rules.
Yeah. Divine command theory, really, at the end of the day, in my opinion, rests throughout all of these systems. I had a conversation with someone who said, oh, well, not all theists, hold the divine command theory. And it's like, well, but the thing is if you push most of them far enough, if you argue against something far enough about one of their views on right or wrong, and you just are like, wow, I just don't agree with you. You're not convincing me about your perspective that X is wrong. They'll go, well, and this is where I think the DCT comes into it, is they'll say, well, that's what the creator says. I haven't found a single one where we've had an argument like that, and it hasn't fallen back on that at some point.
Like, for instance, when you're having a conversation with one of these college students and they reveal this to you, it's because I want to have sex with anyone I want to have sex with. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that? And
thanks for being honest. At least you know where you stand. Okay.
And then you just sort of allow the Holy Spirit to.
Yeah, I mean, you can say, I always ask them, if it were true, would you become a Christian? When they say no, what else can you do? You just say, well, God gives you the free will to do what you want to do, make the choices you want to make. That's why this is a moral universe, because we have free will and we can make these choices.
So how often does that happen, that they say that if it was true, they wouldn't believe it?
Oh, most of the time.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there are some that'll say stuff like this, Cameron. They'll say,
See, I'm just really incredulous about that. Like, it seems weird that people would admit that. And
Well-
maybe it's because we live in a sort of postmodern culture
Yeah.
that doesn't care about truth.
or they'll say it this way. If you ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? They'll say, yeah, but you couldn't.
You want to go off about the postmodernism?
Well, I mean, this is just unfortunately a trope going on now in right-wing circles, whether Christian or not, of just everything. It comes down to postmodernism's the boogeyman. But that's not necessarily what I want to say. His explanation of it, of why they would say they wouldn't become it, is that they don't care about truth. We already went about this just a few moments ago about how, there is belief and there is acceptance. And you can admit that something's true, right? You can say something's true. That doesn't mean you're now going to worship it and you're going to support it, right? That just, to me, I don't see why he's so surprised by it. Like, you could tell me that something's true, and I could go, wow, that's a horrible thing, and I'm against it. That doesn't mean I'm against it being true per se. I'm saying it's not true. I'm just saying I don't support it, even though it's true.
And I just don't understand how Frank, he was going on and on and on about how people cling to their own scientific truths and having a very positivistic scope. And now he's like defaulted on somehow society being postmodernistic. Like, I don't get how, I just don't get where he gets that from. I think it's become like a buzzword, and probably because Jordan Peterson made it a buzzword, but I just don't know if people really understand the term that they're utilizing. Like, it's just, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that there's just too many postmodernists out there that are literally saying there's no truth whatsoever, there's no basis for it whatsoever. But if you do get a postmodernist, then it's going to be very, very difficult to try and adhere to a scope of science and say that God needs to be put to this basis. You pretty much can't fucking do that.
Well, the postmodern tradition, can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The postmodern tradition is critiquing meta-narratives,
Yes.
right? It's subjecting
Largely,
them,
yes. Yeah.
largely, it's critiquing meta-narratives. There are plenty of postmodernists who are going to go, oh no, yeah, I accept that things can be true. So I still, this is a real caricaturized attack. And it's not that you can't find some people who maybe fit whatever they're trying to do here. But it's just, to me, it's not a serious conversation happening right now, at least with that piece inserted. But the main thing here is to say that they're getting messed up on is to say, well, if someone says, yeah, I still wouldn't be, a Christian after you told me this is true or whatever, it's not that they don't care about what's true. They're just saying, oh, okay, it's true, and I still think he's a scumbag, right? I thought he was a scumbag in his fictional form, and I still think he's a scumbag now. Like, I mean, I don't see what the problem is.
I don't know if either of you have subscribed to Thaddeus Russell.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I don't think he does a great depiction of it, of postmodernism. Personally, I don't think he did a good job in his debate, but I am aware.
Oh, with those other two, you listened to it recently?
Well, I don't know if I've seen his recent one, but I did see a few that he has done in the past. I saw him on Joe Rogan. And,
Okay, this wasn't a debate. He was having a conversation with two academics who are writing a book right now on Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. They're writing a book on postmodernism, and he goes, kind of like what we're saying, even though he might not agree with the way he defends it. He says, Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay joined me to discuss the claim made by a number of prominent public intellectuals that what is called postmodernism is responsible for the authoritarian and hysterical politics coming out of college campuses, which I hear all the time. I think you guys hear it.
Mhm.
Pluckrose and Lindsay have, unlike nearly all those intellectuals, Pluckrose and Lindsay have actually studied not only social justice and identity politics, but also the text of postmodernist thinkers. So he's basically saying, well, no, I don't agree with those statements on postmodernism. It's not this hellish end-of-the-world academic discipline, that maybe there is some good to come out of it. And if you listen to this episode, he says that, and they discuss it. The book's supposed to be coming out in, I think, September.
I think that Nick Gillespie with Reason Mag, he wrote, I think it was 2 years ago, he did an article called Libertarian Postmodernism, a reply to Jordan Peterson, something like that. And I think he said something like, if you have an incredulity toward meta-narratives, you just might be postmodern and a libertarian. It kind of like shows how you can draw, libertarian, perspectives out of postmodern literature and such. And there are a few other people at like libertarianism.org that have done similar. And I know, I think that it's just made into a huge boogeyman. One of my biggest issues with postmodernism, at least when I see the articles that are written on it, and also critical theory, because they often get lumped in together, but it's more, I would say, that the writers for both often write in similar ways. I have issues with just the way they write, if anything. It's very like obscurantist. It's they'll take words that we all know to mean one thing, and then they use it in some weird way, and like you almost have to have a whole nother book to decipher what they're saying. My biggest issue with them is probably just how difficult it is to digest even what they're saying. And so I kind of find it funny in a day when many of these same people would accuse students these days of struggling to get through a CNN article and saying, oh my God, Deleuze and Guattari and Foucault have just, taken over students' minds or something. It's like, do you really think they've read any of these books? You've got to be kidding me. I don't think the vast majority of students are reading any of these people.
They've done it indirectly.
Yeah.
It's being institutionally reinforced without them actually
Just so
reading
you know,
it.
in case you wanted to read, I looked that up, that article, I found it, but I found also, Akiva.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about his as well. Yeah.
Okay, because he wrote one also.
Yeah, his is pretty good as well, I'd say.
Couldn't prove it.
Oh yeah.
That kind of thing, which really means no.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, you can't prove with
Okay.
100% certainty.
Yeah. Okay. You can't prove atheism true with 100% certainty either, but you're claiming to be an atheist. So what's your?
Well, hey, wait a second, because atheism is just a lack of belief.
Oh, stop! Stop! I'm going to slap you.
Well, you could
That's so
point-
silly.
Yeah, the lack of belief stuff I don't take very seriously.
Yeah. Why should it? It's just the person's psychological state. So I lack a belief in materialism. Does that make materialism false necessarily? No. My psychological state doesn't tell me whether or not Christianity is true or false or atheism.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, what the fuck, man? Come on now. Who in the fuck? He's conflating, depending on what you want to call it, whether if you want to call it the agnostics and the atheists, or if you want to go to the more, I'd say the more neo description that a lot of individuals utilize. They'll go with the Gnostic. They'll go with the Gnostic versus agnostic. And who in their fucking mind is going to say, well, I don't know something, therefore God doesn't exist? I would put those individuals that are saying, oh, God doesn't exist, I put those individuals more in the Gnostic camp. And it seems like to me that they're conflating the two. And or at least Frank is. I know Cameron didn't seem too positive about it, but Frank, moreover, I don't get what his point is. I mean, maybe there's some morons out there that say, oh, I don't know something, therefore it doesn't exist. But I think for a lot of individuals, it's just to express to another party for communication purposes that I don't have enough evidence for this position, yet I'm willing to hear you out if you do believe in it, or perhaps maybe you don't. Because it could go both ways. Because I'm an individual, of course, I am agnostic on the matter, and I'll listen to both sides. But that's just very disingenuous.
They still don't understand, what is it, the jar of jelly bean analogy. Someone says to me,
Yeah, I know.
jar of jelly beans, there could be thousands.
Oh, you're fucking gumballs. Come on now.
Whatever, go
I'm rewriting it. Jesus
Sorry.
Christ.
I want to put my own spin on it. So a jar of gumballs, there could be hundreds in there. Someone comes to me and says, neither one of us have counted it. He comes to me and says, there's 365 in there. And I say, I don't believe you. That's not the same thing as me saying, no, you're wrong. I don't know the difference. Maybe it is 365. Maybe it isn't. That's completely.
I just don't understand. This should be very, very facile for individuals to understand that individuals that are more agnostic on the matter, they don't have any evidence weighing towards any one position, really, unless if you're talking, and I think it gets very complex and nuanced when you're talking about certain gods. I think there's certain gods that individuals can speak about with more knowledge than others, whether if it is due to socio-cultural variables or what have you is a different discussion. But I mean, there's a huge difference between saying I don't have evidence for this position, therefore I don't believe it, versus completely going off the deep end and saying I do have evidence to negate this position. Or whatever the case is, negate that this thing here exists, or whatever it may be. those are just two. One's a proposition, the other isn't. So I don't know how we can go from talking about a psychological state, because a psychological state isn't in itself a proposition, to then conflate it with a fucking proposition. I just don't understand how many individuals they get this, but in reality they're the fucking joke. And it pisses me off when individuals, they laugh at things they just don't understand. It just reeks of an echo chamber. It smells awful, by the way.
If I was in the room, I would have been like, hey, I'm saying I'm not convinced that what you're saying is true. You know, I'm not convinced that it's the case. Now, if you want to, however you want to phrase it, as lack of belief, or I'm not convinced of it, like, I don't see what's not to take serious about that. It seems pretty straightforward to me. I'm not convinced that your God exists. And the only difference of what I'm saying with maybe what you want me to say is I'm not saying that I'm convinced it isn't the case. I'm just saying I'm not convinced it's the case. You know, I mean, we do that in everyday life about all kinds of things. Why shouldn't you be able to subject it to this?
I don't know. A lot of times, you know, individuals, they will poke holes at the distinction with the agnostic atheist versus the Gnostic atheists and so on, and still, to me,
it's the Steve McRae thing all over again.
Right? Yeah, but still, I just don't understand how you can conflate the two. I mean, it's a difference to disagree with the paradigm of categorization. It's a whole nother thing to not even fucking understand it. And to be quite frank with you, it doesn't really get you too far when you're just disagreeing with definitions.
Alex, I really think you're just an atheist because you like to curse.
Probably. Oh man, if it wasn't, the Bible tells you to keep a clean mouth, but I don't know if that has to do with swearing or the fact that you should actually wash your mouth because people didn't know proper hygiene back then. But
yeah, see, to me, it screams of I want to avoid any semblance of burden of proof, right? And that's my answer to that. Is just let the other person do all the arguing, which everyone knows is a lot more.
Steve was probably jerking off when he heard that.
What's wrong with that? What's fucking wrong with that? I don't know if he's saying, I mean, he originally was saying there's an issue with that. Like, what the fuck is the problem with that? Why should you not say you don't know? Why would I put a burden of proof on myself for something I don't actually have enough evidence for? Yes, you should let the other people do the fucking work if they're the ones fucking having the confidence to put forth the goddamn assertion. Come on now. I'll let him explain himself, but I do not have a good feeling that he's going to do a complete 180 and say, you know, this is pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty intellectually honest. Like, it blows my mind. It's like when you go up to someone. I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience before, but you could go up to someone that doesn't understand basic mathematics, and you go up to them and you say, well, 2 + 2 = 4, and they're like, no, it's 5. And then you show them why 2 + 2 = 4, reversibility and all the other stuff, and then they're just like, 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, like, they're not actually giving some sort of rebuttal. They're just shitting on it. And it's like they're appealing to some sort of cultural stigmatization, if you will. It's just like it doesn't seem reasoned in my book, and I just don't get why you would shit on that. That's intellectually honest to say, okay, I don't know this, therefore I'm not going to put a proposition for it. What the fuck is wrong with that? I seriously don't get that.
So I think what some people are saying is that if you say something like I said earlier of, I'm not convinced that there is a God. Someone will, well, why is it that you're not convinced? And so when they're saying you have to justify things, you have to, well, what is it about the situation you're not convinced of it? And so now, from what I understand, and Steve could always correct me, and so I could be totally wrong, but he would say that your burden of justification would be lighter than a theist. Like, there's definitely a lighter justification you have to make. So you could say something like, oh, I'm not convinced because, you know, and you'll say something like with the divine hiddenness argument, right? You haven't seen evidence of this God. You don't see any reason to think that it's necessary to have one. So you just have to give it like some kind of a justification for why you're not convinced. Now, Alex may still say you don't have to do that. And I honestly don't necessarily disagree. Like, I don't know why I can't just say I'm not convinced and that's the end of it, you know? They're the ones saying a positive claim.
Well, how would you frame? See, here's the thing: is that you can say that you don't know something without actually having a level of knowledge why you don't know that. You can be purely fucking ignorant of your own ignorance, and that could be the one thing you do know is that you don't know, but you may not know that. How the fuck would you ever frame that in a syllogism? to say you don't know something.
Yeah.
It would be so fucking tedious and unnecessary. It's just like no conversation practically would ever get beyond that point, because at some point you're going to reach something where someone says, I don't know. And then and then you ask them, well, how do you not know this? And maybe they'll give a couple other explanations, and it's just literally someone keeps saying, why? And it's just so unnecessary. These motherfuckers talk about fucking infinite regress, and that's one thing. It's just not conducive to a good conversation, which, mind you, much different from having a conversation than talking about cosmology and all that other bullshit and biology and et cetera, but it's completely unnecessary. If someone says, I don't know something, and you want a conversation to progress, you probably should take that as a fact, that they're not trying to schmooze you or anything like that. Anyways, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, for me, my response would be, no one has put forth an argument that's been convincing to me so far. Maybe you will in this conversation we're about to have, but so far, I have not heard something that's been convincing to me. And so for me, I always think about who is making the positive case here. So if someone came up to me and said they were an atheist, and they said that they know for sure that God does not exist, well, okay, now they need to convince me of why they've gotten to that place, because I'm not in that place, right? I couldn't make a strong case and say that I've debunked it, you know. But if someone said that they did, then I don't have to then give a justification for why I haven't done the same thing, right? They're the ones who're saying that they can, so like they should make the case for it, and I get to pick it apart. Sucks to suck if you're going to make the positive claim for something. That's just what happens. I don't know how you could say we're on equal footing there, even if I have to say some kind of even basic surface level justification, such as, oh, I haven't heard something that's convinced me so far. That's still way less weightier on me than it is on the other person who's making this case.
I wouldn't even say that's surface level justification. That's just, you just rephrase, that's just a tautology, ultimately, to say I don't know. If you're saying I haven't been convinced, it's ultimately the same idea. So, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just completely unnecessary to say, oh, yeah, you need to prove why you don't know. You're not coming from a position of knowledge. So,
well, I guess,
why the fuck would you try and corroborate that? I mean, again, you could say you know that you don't know, but still, it's still rooted in the fact that you don't know something. That's the foundational aspect.
But you could have someone who's never had any arguments ever before on the subject, has never read anything on the subject, and they were asked that question, and they're like, no, I literally don't know. I haven't even thought about it. Versus you could have someone else who's had many debates on the subject and has read on it and been like, wow, I've never heard a convincing argument so far, and I've read a lot, and those two people are still in two different places, but at the end of the day, they both have the same situation of they don't know.
Right, yeah, and I'd say both of them ultimately haven't been convinced, obviously for different reasons. One has heard some shoddy arguments, and the other one just hasn't possibly heard any at all. That's a pretty damn good reason to not be convinced by something.
I said, I don't know why it's not serious. He says that, oh, that lack of belief stuff, I don't take that seriously. Well, why not? He just kind of says it, but he doesn't give us any reason why it's not serious.
Well, I probably should listen to more of it.
Let's find out.
Well, I guess he said, oh, it's just a psychological state, but like, what is that supposed to mean?
Well,
I think that was Frank that said that.
I know Turek did say that.
State.
Okay.
They both agree on that it's not serious.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I was saying, all belief is a psychological state. That's the point of a belief. It's a psychological state of you holding a position.
Sure, I agree with that. I think a lot of philosophers they try and distinguish a psychological state from a proposition. That's usually where the distinction occurs. That's not to say that it isn't problematic. It absolutely could be problematic, but again, it's just a way to distinguish the two.
More difficult to do to defend your position than to just just express skepticism. Right. You can do that about anything. Sure. And that's what Christians point out a lot, is that, like, if you really want to be a skeptic, then embrace solipsism. Embrace the idea that you're the only mind out there.
Why aren't you skeptical?
There you go.
Actually, the easiest way of dealing with it is just ask a person who says that they lack a belief. It's just 3 questions, or just say this. Here are 3 positions. God exists, God doesn't exist, or I don't know. Which one are you closer to? Now, if they say I don't know, you're an agnostic. If they say no, they're an atheist. If they say yes, they're a theist. Okay, done.
Yeah. It's also like just a semantic thing. Sure. That's what I like to do too. Is just be like, okay, do you embrace the?
I wanted to respond to the point with Camry saying you could do that for everything. Yeah, in a capacity sense, you could do it for everything, but I wouldn't say that you could do it in a justifiable sense. I certainly would not say that someone saying, "Oh, I'm skeptical of 2 + 2 = 4" is on the same level of someone saying, "I'm skeptical of a fucking God exists." I wouldn't say that someone saying, "I'm skeptical of a God exists" is on the same level as someone saying, I'm skeptical to the fact that, or I'm skeptical to the assertion that the MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism or something along those lines. They're not on the same grounding. And this is something that I just don't really understand. With theists, they speak so much so as if the evidence has already been laid down and it's established. It's not the same thing.
It's one thing, like I say, when it comes to burden of proof, I do put in an exclusion in there for if it's something that's accepted by pretty much everybody, and I'll give you a good example of it, then I think anybody who says, no, that's wrong, or they don't believe it or whatever, has a burden of proof. And like something like, if I said right now Donald Trump is the president of the United States, I don't think I have a burden of proof for that.
No, because that's axiomatic. That's
Something but if someone says no, they don't, that person has a burden of proof.
If they say that's not the case, then I definitely would agree with you there. I'd say there's definitely, it's pretty easy to prove that Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and I guess maybe I guess you could prove it in that sense. It wouldn't be axiomatic, but it's something that I look at and I say it's pretty unnecessary to try and deliberate on, or at least as us individuals living in the United States. Maybe it'd be much more of an argument in places of the world that don't really understand the situation in the United States very well, so they may not even know who Donald Trump is. So that may be a different case, and I think that's when you have to probably consider
I understand
the cultural variables. But
the point I'm making is the reason why we have these rules are so conversations could easily flow. If we had to prove every single thing we said, we would never be able to talk about anything.
It'd be hard to move onto the meaningful points. Actually, we should actually say, okay, where does the evidence lie? And I think a lot of times when you get caught up in these things that are so unnecessary to try and provide evidence to, it's almost like it's some sort of fucking guise or what have you to try and get people caught up in actually trying to delve into the topics that deserve that type of consideration, deliberation. So
and that's also why we don't have a burden. That's one of the good reasons why we don't have a burden of proof for, I don't know, because why should I prove the reason I don't believe something or I don't know something is because I'm not the one making the claim. But if I had to do that every time I ask the question, do I have to, like, if I'm in the middle of a classroom, and
it would defeat the point of the burden of proof as well.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing that is completely or should be excluded from the burden of proof, it should be that. If we're throwing that into the burden of proof sort of categorization or what would qualify as such, it's just completely pointless to even bring it up at that point.
Yep.
It's completely pointless to say you have a burden of proof for substance. So unless if you're trying to educate individuals, but still, principally, it wouldn't make much sense at all. Honestly, if we have nothing that we can distinguish as not requiring the burden of proof, it's just, to me, it just seems pointless to talk about.
Yep.
I wanted to just quick touch on the other part that was covered because I feel like we're going to be pausing every few moments.
He's saying a lot of stuff.
I don't care about labels here. So there's going to be this whole debate that could come up right now. And I think we probably shouldn't take the bait and fall into it about, are you an agnostic or are you an atheist? Really, it depends on how you're going to frame things. If you're going to saying you don't know equals agnosticism, then I'm an agnostic. If you're going to say that, saying you don't know is being agnostic, then I'm agnostic. And then being an atheist is making a positive claim that God does not exist. Then I wouldn't be an atheist. I wouldn't.
Be a negative
claim,
but yeah.
You know what I'm saying. You're making a positive statement.
I'm just
I know you're a pain in the ass. You're making a positive claim in a negative way. So I don't think that we should fall into that, because that's literally, people are having 4-hour conversations every day over that topic alone. So I don't care if he wants to say that I'm an agnostic because I'm saying I don't know. Then I don't even give a shit, because my issue is not about labels personally. Now, if someone calls themselves the stateless atheist, they may have a bone in that fight. But I personally just don't care. But the reality is there is a movement around using the atheist label in a certain way, and enough people do use it in that way, and I think we should nitpick about it personally.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not a make or break situation where the two terms are at like complete polar opposites, and I'm sure you guys have had this conversation with people numerous times, where socialism can mean two consummately different things, then it's probably a little bit more problematic, and it's a lot more difficult for a conversation to sort of progress from there on. But it's just, if they're relatively similar, and I think that paradigm, it's like the quadrilateral paradigm that I've seen so many people reference with the whole agnostic, gnostic, theist, atheist thing. And if you're just saying, again, as you mentioned, Ryan, the more classical sort of paradigm where it's, you can be agnostic or atheist in that sense, I don't really care myself either, to be honest. So I agree with you.
This or not. If you don't, then that's fine.
What do you think is more likely?
Yeah.
God does exist, doesn't exist,
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah, what I've actually suggested on a video that I recorded a little while ago was there's two questions you can ask an atheist. One of them is, do you believe that God exists? And if they answer yes or no, well, if they're an atheist, they'll answer no. And then you can say, well, do you also believe in evidentialism, which is the idea that your beliefs ought to be proportioned to the evidence?
Mm-hmm.
And so if they answer no, they believe God does not exist, and they also believe that your beliefs ought to be proportioned to the evidence, ask, well, what's your evidence that God doesn't exist?
Mm-hmm.
And usually, I think the same kind of situation happens with a lot of Christians too.
I just wanted to confirm Ryan's point. There actually is a razor, a logical razor for that. It's called Grice's razor. I just wanted to provide context to that.
We're not really prepared to defend the things that we believe.
No.
And with an atheist, the same thing is going to happen. So if you ask that to an atheist, you're probably going to get the same kind of like blank stare.
And you see, that presupposes that this is a universe that is reasonable and has evidence. This is what I'm trying to do in the book Stealing from God, is pointing out that when atheists say they have reasons that there's no God, or that atheism is true, or materialism is true, or quantum vacuums, or whatever they want to say, they're actually stealing an orderly universe from God in order to say that God doesn't exist. They're stealing our ability to reason. Why should we?
You still have to demonstrate that God exists.
I mean, what is he talking about though? The Bible?
Why should?
I mean, where the fuck does the Bible talk about quantum vacuums? Like,
No,
what is there to?
He's saying without God we couldn't reason, so therefore we couldn't come up with quantum vacuums. So that's what he argues in his book, Stealing from God. God.
See, I haven't read his book, so that's probably why.
God gave us the ability to reason. So whenever we reason something and we say we don't need God, we're stealing from God to say God doesn't exist. But you haven't demonstrated that God gave us the reason. You're just stating he did.
Gotcha. That's my fault then.
Okay. Just don't want it to happen again.
Okay. It probably will, but
reason about things outside of our skulls if there's no God, if we're just molecular machines, if we're just moist robots. We shouldn't. But that's what they say we are. We're moist robots. So why should we believe anything they say?
You've got some one-liners that are just doozies. Well, moist robots.
That's what they are.
I don't know anyone else who uses that.
That's what they're claiming we are. We're moist robots. So why should we believe anything we think?
Well, let's move on to the next question here. If you had 2 minutes with Richard Dawkins or one of the other new atheists, what would you say? Maybe you could imagine you're in an elevator,
okay.
Right? Okay.
And
pretend I'm Dawkins.
And it's appropriate to have the conversation. Hey, Richard, I've read a lot of your books.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah, that's very nice. Let me ask you a question. You claim to be a materialist. So when you say a materialist, you think everything is driven by the laws of physics, correct? Yes. So why should you believe anything you think?
So you do a kind of
ask questions. Yeah.
So you do a question thing.
Yeah. I'd ask him questions.
Because
I want the answer to that.
Yeah.
I've asked Michael Shermer to that twice in debate. He hasn't answered.
So he really didn't give an answer?
No.
He just, what did he do? Did he just deflect or move on?
Stony Brook, yeah, he kind of made a joke out of it. I said, if you're a moist robot, you're just a molecular machine. Why should you believe anything you think? He said, oh, electric me. That's all he said.
Electric me?
Electric me. Like,
I don't know what that means.
It means he's just bunch of electrical impulses going on. He wouldn't answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no answer to it.
Well, here's one thing that I like to say, and I made a video on this. I even have a t-shirt.
He doesn't have an answer either. He's just doing the God of the Gaps again. Moist robot, therefore. No. You're just saying God must be the reason. That's not a reason that has evidence. You're making it up. This guy's pissing me off.
Well, I mean, we see things that are consistently reliable over a long period of time, and there's a lot of trial and error involved in why we do things the same way we do over the past. And when we can improve, we change. The thing is like we exist on this earth, and we really have no other choice but to either attempt to try things out and progress, or we have to just stagnate and die. Like there's not really many options there. And so most people don't get caught up in thinking about, oh God, can I trust myself or not trust myself? We just do. We just live. There is no process where you go, God, I really wonder if I can trust myself before I, go walk out, into the forest over there and try to pick some berries for survival. You just do it. And so I just don't understand what the issue is here. Now it's nice when you can say something like, oh, we're just a meat robot or something to make it sound like we're like devalued or something like that. But the human brain is actually one of the most complex things we've ever discovered so far. And so it's not something that's to be just, laughed about and, you hand wave and say, oh, well, we're just some stupid meat machine or something. We're actually very complex, and we have, reasoning mechanisms within us and decision-making mechanisms that allow us to, weigh various, options and we have depth perception, right? We have mechanisms that measure depth perception, right? So when he wants to talk about, oh, well, why should you trust anything? It's like, well, we have mechanisms that are just inbuilt in us that have developed over time. And, it's not even about whether you trust or not trust. You just live. And when we start running into problems, then we try to, problem solve and figure out better ways of handling the situation. So for me, it's like, it's as if he's trying to create a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, that's a common argument I hear in theists. David Wood makes that argument often.
Which argument's that? This argument about we're just meat machines?
Yeah, that why should we accept our own reasoning? He probably got it from Frank Turek.
Well, I mean, he does have his own PhD himself, David Wood, but yeah.
Yeah, but in what? What is it?
Yeah. No, I think it's theology or something. But I mean, Turek's been around a long time, so I mean, you could say that maybe Turek was the inspiration for him or to go on and do his PhD or whatever. But anyway,
they're not arguments.
That's right.
So they can maybe raise some interesting questions,
just like possibilities are not arguments. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, that I'm still a little iffy on. I think possibilities can be possible explanations, and if it's a good explanation,
if there's evidence behind it,
because everything is a possibility up front or at first, and then you find evidence for it.
Right, but if there's no evidence for it, it's just a possibility. It's not.
Right. It's just not a good explanation.
Yeah,
it's possible explanation, but it's not a good one that necessarily fits the evidence. So what would you say then to like the point about questions are not arguments? Is that like if you were to give an argument maybe in a quick elevator ride, what would you do?
To Richard Dawkins?
Yeah. Instead of going the question route, if you were going to go the argument route, what would you do?
Well, I think
so pretend that Richard go, well, why do you believe that God exists? Prove to me that God exists.
Okay, well, I would start with the cosmological argument.
And you can do this in a minute because I'm really
space,
curious.
Matter, and time had a beginning, as you and all your colleagues agree with, then whatever caused the universe can't be made of space, matter, and time. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, also intelligent.
Why would it have to choose to create? Why couldn't it be a machine that creates?
I think it follows the point that you mentioned earlier with him just sort of assuming God into existence.
In order to be able to make a choice. Now, does that prove the Christian God? No.
Well, maybe
but it may be the Christian God. It certainly seems to disprove atheism.
So maybe I'm not super familiar with Richard Dawkins' beliefs. Does he believe that the universe began to exist, or is he more on the eternal side of things? Which I'm learning is actually like a perennial question that's been going on in philosophy for thousands of years.
Yeah, well, I think that he would suggest, what he would suggest is,
Which side is he on?
in his book, The God Delusion, is, yeah, it looks like the universe had a beginning, but I think as he puts it, let's just wait for physics Darwin. It's a faith position.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, Darwin has already explained biology to us, even though Dawkins admits that the origin of life is a complete mystery to everybody, according to him. Darwin has explained biology, so physics is waiting for its Darwin, so to speak. So we're just going to be.
A couple of points. First off, I think it would have probably been cosmology, which is a specific branch of physics, is maybe waiting for its Darwin. I was going to make a second point, and I don't remember what it was. I'm getting old. Well, I'll play it if I remember
Agnostic
it.
at this point.
Okay.
When I think it's quite obvious that space, matter, and time had a beginning. We know time had a beginning philosophically. Otherwise, today never would have gotten here. There can't be an infinite number of days before today. So if time had a beginning, whatever created time must be timeless. And isn't it interesting that Dawkins had no problem years ago, or let me just say it this way, atheists had no problem years ago. I don't know if it's Dawkins or not, because Dawkins lives in the modern era, but atheists had no problem years ago believing that the universe was eternal and had no cause, right? Just it's eternal. But now they have a problem believing that God's eternal.
That wasn't just atheists. That was the common belief of everyone, or most people. It wasn't just, the little atheists in the corner or anything like that. That was a common belief until it was actually it was a theist who figured out the Big Bang. I think I don't remember his name.
Yeah, it was like a Catholic priest.
Yeah. It wasn't just atheists, because we don't believe it anymore. Therefore, he's trying to put down atheists. I don't know. It's weird.
If God exists and Christianity is true, that when people die, they don't go out of existence. That's what I'm saying. They just change location. They go from this life to the next life. And my point is that God can do that anytime he wants. He can move us from this life to next life anytime he wants. He can move us at 2 years old or 82 years old or any other time he wants to move us. So when people say, well, killing children, as it appears, God kills children in the Old Testament. Well, he's evil for doing that. Well, God is the author of life. He can take life anytime he wants and move us into the next life anytime he wants. And to say that only
God, that's a stupid.
You read my fucking mind.
Stupid fucking argument. Let's just use an example. We believe a lot of people, even right libertarian circles or whatever, argue that, well, property gives you control. But that's not necessarily true. If I work for, creation gives you control. If I work for somebody else and I create something, I don't have control of that thing I created. The company I works for does. So, and I would guess, I'm pretty sure Frank Turek is on the capitalist side, not the socialist side, because then there's a little bit of different argument. So
I'm pretty sure if that was the case, then he probably would have had an issue with the postmodern statement. But that's just a presumption. I don't know.
Yeah, not necessarily. Noam Chomsky is a socialist who doesn't like postmodernism, but
oh wow.
No,
Yeah,
I
no.
know. I know. I'm just saying, I felt like he would have had more to include on that point. I felt like he would have jumped on it, but
it's a good assumption that some evangelical conservative like him is not going to be for socialism.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. So I bet you his political beliefs, economic beliefs are that when you create something, you don't necessarily have control over it. Your employer might. So why would God automatically have control?
Well, a better way to think about it is this, though, is that, parents can create children, right? That doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want to their children.
not in the same exact sense, but yeah.
Well,
By his theory, his idea, if parents created children, therefore they could kill the children.
Yeah, I mean, for me, let's say, for instance, that I, as a human, and of course I'm not actually saying that I have this capacity, but if we were to create our own separate race, and these things were pretty similar to us in that they do experience pain, they experience all those other things. And so if we were put in a position where we created them, and we create them with our, again, in our eye, with our intention and everything like that. And we were to put them through excessive pain and agony because we had the understanding that they would act in such a way that was horrible. But we're putting the onus on them. They're dealing with their own fuck up. And that's very problematic because I feel personally that if your deity knew how we were going to act and he created us anyways, well, he's just fucking shoveling the pain and agony onto us. Wherein, in reality, I personally feel you should have fucking done it right the first time.
Though, along those lines, I mean, that's the reason why I argue against the robots are going to take over all the jobs, because you have to look at it two different ways. I think I talked to Ryan about this when we talked on the phone. Now, if to be able to take over every single job, robots would have to have either free will or the appearance of free will that like we have, because they would need to be able to take over all creative jobs also. And to be able to do creative jobs, you'd need to have some type of free will. You'd have to be able to change things.
Sure, I get what you're saying.
But if they have that free will, we can't make them work for us because then it would be slavery.
Well, the thing that I'd like to ask a lot of Christians and really theists in general that just make this argument, usually from my experience, it's Christians for obvious reasons. But I mean, if we, for instance, and I'm not saying again that this is going to happen, it'd be pretty. I could see it being flawed in many ways. But if we did have androids and we gave them the ability to feel pain and what have you, would it be okay to subject them to that? And would it be an apropos thing to do to say that we can just torture a bunch of robots and have them go through a substantial amount of pain just because we created them? And I don't know if too many theists would say that's fine.
Well, you know, it almost seems like in this case, he's saying that it doesn't matter that God might, you know, cause a lot of harm, cause a lot of pain, you know, do a lot of killing and stuff, because he, unlike us, is able to move his victims, if we want to keep with term, you know, just saying victims. He can move them into another state, right, where they will continue to exist. And I'm sure you would say something like that, where you can go on to heaven and bliss and all that kind of stuff, right? And so he's got this unique ability, unlike us, to be able to make their condition better in some other life. I don't know if he's exactly saying it, but it sounds like he is, because he's talking about how, oh, he can take you from age 2 to 80 on to the next life, essentially. And that is something I've heard, where it's like this ability for this deity to apparently give you a much better existence in the next life, that justifies any bad stuff it does to you in this life.
Which is, you know, pretty fucking terrible, because it
Yeah,
doesn't
it's pretty
change the
messed
fact
up.
that you're still suffering.
Right, yeah. No,
It
if I
doesn't
suddenly
take it
had,
away.
if I suddenly had the ability to bring my victim back after I tortured them, that wouldn't justify all the pain and agony I just put them through.
God is fair. If everyone gets to live to 80 years old, that doesn't strike me as the right argument to make. That God's the author of life. He can move us from this life to the next life anytime he wants.
Yeah, I think there's actually something to that, because Richard Swinburne argues something similar. I forget what book it's in, but he argues basically the same kind of thing, that if you own something, if you're the owner of it, then you have right over it in some sense.
But he did
We already went over this.
in an arbitrary way.
Creation doesn't necessarily mean ownership.
He doesn't treat.
And also, why would God own us? That doesn't sound like love to me.
Yeah, I just think it's fucking incomplete as all hell.
Sorry,
You
man.
know,
Needed.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, feel free to cut this out if you want, because we already did kind of go over it. But honestly, though, it's like you have the chance to find property ownership in so many fucking ways, and of course that can include humans, I guess, in this sense. And it's like you can go off of creation, which is wholly difficult to try and ascertain. And I get that with a lot of individuals when I talk to them about first use and it's and creation. It's like, how do you know that they created in the first place? Because not everything's very easy to dictate. Sometimes it is. Or we can look at a situation as to who has the most merited use for such a thing. And if God is just using us for inappropriate means just to fucking slaughter us, I would not argue that he has that merited means of ownership. I think in that sense, to speak deontologically, I guess you could say, that I think we would possibly have much more of an opportunity, and therefore we should have the opportunity to own ourselves. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
It's just-
I mean, It sounds like we're living in one big cosmic covenant community.
That's fucking great. I love that.
God is Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Hey, he doesn't like the gays either, so it makes complete sense.
And he kicked them out of his household.
Physically removed or spiritually removed if we're talking about the next life.
Yeah, exactly. With hell, yeah. Exactly. This is good. I don't know. Maybe include this for a second.
Maybe keep it in. Yeah.
Keep a separate clip for this because this is really good. That's great.
Since once life begins, it's eternal. The transition point to the next life is up to God, not us.
We may be fine to just stop here and just kind of give our kind of overall thoughts. Honestly, it seems like we covered the meat and potatoes of
the rest he's talking about memes.
Yeah, a lot of this is just kind of basic Q&A type questions now. But I mean, ultimately, what you're getting from this character is, any kind of in order for living in this world to make sense and for us to be able to trust anything, you need to have God, because otherwise we're just these material beings that are based in random processes that have no reason or justification to trust anything going on.
And we're moist.
And we're moist. Yeah. So it looks like the pharmaceutical industry and the cosmetic industry are in some trouble if that's true.
I mean, honestly though, I'm gonna be quite frank with you. Again, another joke, but I don't know why, but I feel like the moist robots thing. I just feel like that is a very generalized sort of ad hominem in a way. If kind of like a genetic fallacy as well. If what you're saying is that us humans, we don't have enough information to really put forth anything outside of the realm of God, even though there's problems there with assuming if what we think about God is true, and if even our conceptions about God were actually human contrived. But I really do think it's very problematic if you actually have to talk about the source rather than the claims themselves. And I don't know, that's sort of what I got from it, that I may be incorrect, but it sort of seems like he is framing it in such a way where it's kind of like it's along the ad hom sort of genetic fallacy sort of territory.
Yeah. One other thing I want to say, I mean, I think I've said a lot throughout the video.
Yeah.
But one thing that I actually find funny, like Ryan was saying at the beginning, how people were saying that Cameron cut him off a lot. I didn't get that.
I didn't really either.
Yeah, if you read the comments, they're all going, "Oh God, Cameron kept cutting him off." Actually, and now having watched it, I think he did a lot of good clarifying questions. Probably not as much as I would have liked. Actually, I think he could have been a lot harder on him, but he also did a better job than a lot of other interviewers would have done. So I was generally pretty happy with the way he went about it.
Yeah, I really didn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, the only problems we had was Turek's an idiot.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, obviously he's an interviewer, so it's kind of hard to. I mean, obviously he still injected some of his sentiments into it, which we may have had lingering issues with. But obviously, since the preponderance of this video circulates around what Turek thinks, it just naturally that most of our problems are going to rise from that.
Generally, listening to the two of them, I actually think Cameron is smarter than Turek.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like I got more points that he is much more open to differing points of view. And obviously he mentioned he was agnostic. I believe he said he was agnostic on the whole creationism debate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so
he was, basically.
I felt like in that way, and that's what we've spent a huge portion of this video discussing, so much so that it's like we may have to cut some parts of it out because it gets so redundant. But it's like, I feel like he's more in line with what we're trying to say, is that just to be honest, which doesn't make much sense to me why he originally was saying, "Oh, I got a problem with the whole burden of proof thing." But to me, it seems like he's more in line with what we're saying rather than Frank Turek, just as you said, Ryan, having his feet in the sand and trying to give whatever fucking answer it is. And it's an explanation. It's an explanation, giving the notion that it's better to say something than nothing at all, which obviously is a load of shit.
Yeah, well, he wants certainty and a neat package so that he can just cookie cutter response at Q&A type sessions at a university. I mean, that's, you can't give those quick, witty responses if you don't have your feet in the sand and you're super certain. It just doesn't sound as
It's not as persuasive.
right. It's not as strong and powerful as And the same could be the case with Christopher Hitchens versus, say, some atheist philosopher. And atheist philosophers could be a lot more, generally speaking, tempered in the claims they make and their presentation. But, Hitchens is very theatrical and speaks in such an assertive way. And, it does.
It's the posh accent.
Yeah. So.
Everyone knows that if you have a posh accent, that adds, 10 points on your IQ.
Basically, Cameron is more about discussing the ideas more than anything, and that's what his channel is dedicated to. Whereas Turek is an apologist who's going out and trying to convince people to believe exactly what he believes, and he's very rigid about it. And so, honestly, the best interaction that's happened with Frank Turek was our good friend Isaac, who said to him that Jesus was a mushroom.
Yeah, I saw that. And Turek was like, "What?"
Yeah.
So we stopped it here because the rest of the video is pretty much just on memes. And, well, we could have probably gotten some discussion out of it. A lot of it seemed to be repetitive. I will link the full video below in case you think we missed anything that we should have covered, or if you think we're misrepresenting their positions in any way. But I hope you all had a good time and learned something along the way. If you have any other videos or articles that you'd want us to respond to, or things you just want us to comment on, please comment below. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you everyone for joining me. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.